Hey, so I'm not here today. I will be back on Monday, and on Monday, you are going to be taking a test on the Crucible. So I got a couple things. First of all, because I'm a bit of a foolish individual, some of the questions I've been having you answer were off of the study guide. So here's what we're going to do. Make sure you've turned in Act 3 questions from yesterday, and then you turn in your Act 4 questions on Monday. As long as you do those, I'll give you credit for the study guide. I will have another copy of some of those study questions if you want to look over that before the test, but you do not need to redo it. Okay, so as long as you've did Act 3 yesterday and turned that in, and then on Monday you'll turn in Act 4, then I will just give everybody credit who did that for the study guide, which is a couple bonus points. But if you wanted something to study off of or review, I will have that optional sheet for you. And again, you do not need to refill that out. Okay. The sub is also, Mr. Boyd is also going to be handing out your take-home writing assignment, your first essay for the Crucible, and that has the turnedin.com information. So the paper won't be due till Tuesday morning. After your test on Monday, you will have some time with computers to work on that a little bit. On that assignment sheet, if you want to get going on it over the weekend, it has your enrollment information for your period for turnedin.com. Make sure you please enroll in your course. It's a lot more time-consuming and frankly annoying if I have to look between periods to try to find where you're at. If you have any questions on those, I'll be able to answer it on Monday. Again, with all of the writing assignments, I know I didn't get a chance to get around and check everybody's sample that they did. But just make sure you give it your best shot and turn it in on time. Then I will give you plenty of feedback, and then you can go back and revise it fully for full points if you would like to. It might take you a time or two, but you're certainly welcome to do that. Okay, so if you have any other questions, you could email me, nkrueger@isd622.org, and I will try to check that this weekend. And so we're just going to talk Act 4. So if you could open up your books. If you have the softcover book, you can pretend that you are looking at the page numbers we are and just kind of follow along. So on page 121, this is the very beginning of the act. We are in prison, right? And they've been in Puritan prison for several months now. Proctor's been chained to the wall in Puritan prison. And the scene opens with Tituba and Sarah Good and Herrick, and they are talking sarcastically. Herrick is kind of the prison warden, and Sarah Good and Tituba, if you remember, were two of the first people who were arrested for this, and so they've been in jail since the beginning. Right, so if anyone knows that this is not real, it's Tituba. And they have a pretty sarcastic attitude as they talk about the Majesty coming. Majesty would be the devil in this instance, and flying back to Barbados. But they both understand that this is nonsense, right? And so this is kind of sarcastic, gallows humor, actually. So going on, Danforth comes in, as do Hawthorne and Paris and later Hale. On page 124, Hawthorne says, "Let you question Hale, Excellency. I should not be surprised he have been preaching in Andover lately." Danforth says, "We'll come to that. Speak nothing of Andover." Paris prays with him. Now, a couple things. Reverend Hale has returned. If you remember him in the beginning, when we first saw him in Act 1, when he showed up, he was very confident in his abilities, and he thought he had all the answers and knowledge, both to identify the devil and then to defeat him. Throughout the play, we've seen him start to waver in his confidence in both his abilities and just his understanding of the situation. And at the end of Act 3, once they arrested Proctor, Hale quits the court. Right? He spends several months out kind of wandering and contemplating, and then he comes back into town and he's telling people that they should confess. Basically, he's telling them that they should lie and save their lives. There's a town nearby named Andover, and they're having riots over the trials there. And they're kind of hinting at the fact that Hale might have had something to do with that, the fact that he's been preaching in Andover lately. Hawthorne is talking about Reverend Paris, who was one of the driving forces of the witch trials. And if you remember, a lot of the stuff in this play is based on problems that people had with each other before. And one of Paris's big motivations is he's worried about losing his job. The Putnams wanted somebody else to get it, he got it. And so a lot of the play, going back to the beginning, when his family was directly involved in the witch stuff going on in the woods, he's pushed the trials really hard. But Paris is not looking well. It said, "I met him yesterday coming out of his house and bid him good morning, and he wept and went his way. I think it is not well the village sees him so unsteady." "I think it be the cows, sir." "Cows?" Danforth said. "Because there's so many people in jail now, most of the livestock, there aren't enough adults around to take care of them, so cows are wandering the roads and going house to house, as are children." On the next page of 125, "Excellency," Paris said, "hear me. It is Providence. Reverend Hale has returned to bring Rebecca Nurse to God." "He bids her confess," Danforth said. Paris said, "Hear me. Rebecca have not given me a word this 3 months since she came, and now she sits with him and her sister and Martha Corey and 2 or 3 others and pleads with them, confess their crimes and save their lives. Now, they are phrasing this in a positive way, as if they're trying to help her. But really, what Reverend Hale is doing is he's trying to get her to confess and to knowingly lie because he feels guilty and he feels responsible if she ends up dying or anybody else does. On to 126, Paris also has some more information about his lovely niece, Abigail. She took off, right? This be the 3rd night. You see, sir, she told me she'd stay a night with Mercy Lewis, and the next day, when she does not return, I send to Mr. Lewis to inquire. Mercy told them she would sleep in my house for the night. Kids have been doing this, we're going to all sleep over at different places, trick to try to sneak out of the house for a long time. Excellency, I think they be aboard a ship. My daughter tells me how she heard them speaking of ships last week, and tonight I discover my strong box is broke into. 31 pounds is gone, he's penniless. Now, even though we don't like Paris, we don't like Abigail either, and she stole all his money and took off. Now, that should make the trials look pretty sketchy, right? As she was kind of the lead girl and one of the God's instrument people put in town to cleanse the town of evil, and one of the people who accused the most people in town. And the fact that she takes off just when the trials get bad should tell us something. But anyway, on 127, they return to the topic of Andover, that town nearby where they're having the riots. I tell you what is said here, sir. Andover had thrown out the court, they say, and they will have no part of witchcraft. There be a faction, sir, feeding on the news, and I tell you true, sir, I fear there will be a riot here. Riot? Why, at every execution I have not but high satisfaction in the town. Once we watch the movie, we will see several rounds of hangings. The first round or two, when it's people like Sarah Osborne and people like that, the town dislikes these people. And so it's not, I wouldn't say it's a party atmosphere, but they're screaming and they're yelling and they're pointing and they're laughing. You see smiles on the faces. But once we get to, excuse me, this morning, when Proctor, Martha Corey, and Rebecca Nurse are supposed to get hung, the attitude of the crowd is very different because these are people that they like and respect, right? And what Paris is worried about is if these people that the town still likes and respects refuse to confess and go up and get hung in front of the whole town and maybe pray, that it would cause the town to riot. As in, if these people are, refuse to give the confession and be hung, then maybe these trials aren't valid anyway. On top of 128, Paris says, now Mr. Hale's returned. There's hope, I think, for if he even brings one of these to God, the confession surely damns the others in the public eye. None may doubt more that they are all linked to hell. This way, unconfessed and claiming innocence, doubts are multiplied, many honest people will weep for them, and our good purpose is lost in their tears. They think that if they can get any of those 3 to confess, that would probably be enough, right? Because then it could make the other ones look guilty. Whoa. Paris also said he's been threatened, and so he opened his door, and I don't know if you've ever seen one of those movies where someone hucks a knife and it goes tick, 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 and then sticks in the door, goes that's what happened. And it's a scary thing to happen, and people are threatening him because he's one of the driving people behind the witch trials. Now, Danforth does not want to postpone these trials on any level because what his point is if we postpone the trials or the hangings, then it makes it look like we have questions about this and we're not sure of ourselves. If we're not sure of ourselves, then it might look like we killed all the other previous people that we hung and we just murdered them, as opposed to these people being guilty of a serious crime. Now hear me and beguile yourselves no more. I will not receive a single plea for pardon or postponement. Them that will not confess will hang. 12 are already executed, and the names of 7 are given out, and the village expects to see them die this morning. Postponement now speaks of floundering on my part. Reprieve or pardon must cast doubt upon the guilt of them that died till now. While I speak God's law, I will not crack its voice with whimpering. And so he said, we're going to go through with it no matter what, because if we don't, it looks like we don't know what we're doing. So we need to kill some more people. Now, Hale comes back and tries to explain why he is going around telling people to lie. And he acknowledges that as a minister, his phrasing is, damnation's doubled on a minister that counsels people to lie, especially lying about something which Christians should view as a negative, which is working with the devil. Hale says, Excellency, there are orphans wandering from house to house. Abandoned cattle bellow on the high roads. The stink of rotting crops hang everywhere, and no man knows when the harlot's life cry will take his life. And you wonder if rebellion spoke? Better you should marvel how they do not burn your province. And Hale says, it's simple. I come to do the devil's work. I come to counsel Christians. They should belie themselves. There's blood on my head. Can you not see the blood on my head? He blames himself for all of the deaths, right? And I think if he were to go back and look at the way he acted in that first scene that we looked at a couple days ago with Betty, when after being really arrogantly coming in, handing his books to Proctor, saying they're weighted with authority, then the first person he's called on to examine, who is under the influence of witchcraft or whatever, he ends up getting everything wrong. And the result of that wrongness of his interpretation of what's going on with Betty led to all the witch trials. And Hale goes on, he said, "Let you not mistake your duty as I mistook my own. I came into this village like a bridegroom to his beloved, bearing gifts of high religion, the very crowns of holy law I brought. And what I touched with my great confidence, it died. And where I turned my eye of my great faith, blood flowed up. Beware, Goody Proctor, cleave to no faith when faith brings blood. It is mistaken law that leads you to sacrifice." Now, Elizabeth doesn't promise that she will try to convince Proctor to confess, but she does say she will speak to him. Now, these two have not seen each other in months, and as I talked about the other day, with Daniel Day-Lewis, the actor who plays Proctor is a method actor, right, tries to live the roles, and this is where we get to see the yellow stuff on his teeth. So when we watch the movie, starting on Tuesday, Wednesday, but I guess we won't get to this part till late in the movie, but you'll have to try to figure out for yourself whether that's real plaque or not. Anyway, so Elizabeth has some news of some people. Martha Corey has not confessed, Rebecca Nurse has not confessed, and Giles Corey, if you remember in Act 3, he came to the court with evidence that someone he knew overheard Thomas Putnam say that he was killing his neighbors for their land, right? That was one of the problems with this. If you accuse someone of being a witch and they deny it, then they hang them. If they admit to it, then they're innocent and they go to jail and they have to forfeit up their lands, right? And then Putnam would buy them up. They asked for proof of who the person was, and Giles did not want to give up his friend because then his friend would get arrested and maybe killed. He didn't want to answer this question yes or no. If he answers yes to the question, then they're going to go arrest his friend. If he answers no, I'm not going to tell you the name of the person, then they arrest him and he loses his land. So rather than answer the question one way or another, he just refuses to answer, and he just says, "More weight." So they've got him lying on his back and his arms and legs stretched out, and they put a big rock on his chest, and they say, "Will you give us the name of the person?" He can't say yes, he can't say no, so he just keeps saying more weight, and they just keep stacking rocks on until he suffocates. Now, Proctor's looking for answers from Elizabeth about what he should do here, and she refuses to give them to any. Proctor says, "I cannot mount the gibbet like a saint. It's a fraud. I'm not that man. My honesty's broke, Elizabeth. I'm no good man. Nothing spoiled by giving them this lie that were not rotten long before now." So Proctor's looking for confirmation. He basically said, "I'm already a sinner. I'm already a hypocrite because of the affair, and so I can't go up there honestly and say that I'm going to die like a good person because I know I'm not. So why don't I just give them the confession that they want, and then I get to live?" Elizabeth said, "And yet you've not confessed till now. That speak goodness in you." So she said, "The fact that you've been willing to suffer and, as he acknowledges later, were tortured in that jail cell for that long shows that he's a good person because he could have given the confession right away and he would have been in a much better spot and definitely not tortured." Elizabeth tries to take the blame for the affair herself, and she said, "John, I counted myself so plain, so poorly made, no honest love could come to me. Suspicion kissed you when I did. I never knew how I should say my love. It were a cold house I kept." Now, of all the things that she could say to him at this point, because his guilt is pretty intense at this point, because, I mean, if you think about it, he kind of blames himself for a lot of the witch trials and everything that's happened. If he doesn't have the affair with Abigail, then when Abigail's caught dancing in the woods, I don't think any of these things would have happened, right? The affair was the cause of all of it, and the affair was also the reason why he didn't go to the court right away and tell them that Abigail had said that this had nothing to do with witchcraft. But anyway, then his wife saying, "If I had been nicer and prettier and more affectionate to you, you would not have had to cheat on me." Now, why she says this, I'm not entirely sure, but it's possible that if you look at what she says at the end, that this was her intent, right? That she knows that Proctor can't really live and be satisfied with himself, and he would just live in misery, basically. So she refused to answer either way, but the effect of this guilt leads him in the end towards ripping up the confession and going and getting hung. So the next step is Danforth requires Proctor, unlike everybody else, to write his confession, and they're going to nail it to the door of the church. I think this might be the last straw for Proctor because it's harder to deny that you said that, right? I think his plan was to just go in and confess, and then once he gets out, just kind of forget it happened. But the fact that it's nailed to the church door means the stakes for Proctor are a lot higher, right? There's going to be a kind of a concrete reminder of his confession. And he tears it up, and on 143 he said, "Because it's my name, because I cannot have another in my life, because I lie and sign myself to lies, because I'm not worth the dust on the feet of them that hang." Now, Danforth, in the irony of all ironies, said, "Is that document a lie? If it's a lie, I will not accept it." Of course it's a lie. They've been lies all across the board. Every person who's confessed is a lie. But Danforth can't portray it that way because he's got to keep up the image that this court knows what they're doing and these are legitimate proceedings. Anyway, he tears up the paper and then he gives Elizabeth a beautiful, disgusting, plaque-filled kiss, and then they go and hang him. Now, at the end, right at the last minute, Hale tries to get Elizabeth to go and stop her husband, and she says, "He have his goodness now, God forbid I take it from him." Now, as I said, it's possible that that was her goal, right? And if you look back at some of the things she said that don't seem to make sense, maybe this was her goal in the end. So if you then look at Echoes Down the Corridor, which I think is in the hardcover version, but I don't think it's in the paperback version, so I'll just read a couple of these things. Not long after the fever died, Paris was voted from office, walked out on the high road, and was never heard from again. Then legend has it that Abigail turned up later as a prostitute in Boston. So we can talk about that later. 20 years later, after the last execution, the government awarded compensation to the victims still living and the families of the dead. However, it is evident that some people still were unwilling to admit their total guilt, and also that the factionalism was still alive, for some beneficiaries were not actually victims at all, but informers. Elizabeth Proctor married again 4 years after Proctor's death. In solemn meeting, the congregation rescinded the excommunications, this in March 1712, but they did so upon orders of the government. The jury, however, wrote a statement praying forgiveness for all the victims who had suffered. Certain farms which had belonged to the victims were left to ruin, and for more than a century no one would buy them or live on them. To all intents and purposes, the power of theocracy in Massachusetts was broken. Okay, so as I said, you'll work on Act 4 questions. You'll hang on to those. If you want to take a copy of the study guide, and again, you've done a couple of the sets of those questions, so you don't need to redo them, but if you wanted something to look over to review for the test. So test on Monday, and then with whatever time is remaining after the test, it won't take you too long. It's under 25 questions, matching multiple choice, true, false. Then you'll have computers and can work on your take-home test Crucible writing assignment. So I will see you Monday. Thank you.